What is a crossover question or a crossover essay? Essentially, it's an essay that's going to test more than one topic. So it's probably going to test two and sometimes even three topics. It just depends on how mean the California bar wants to be. Crossover questions do not appear on every bar exam, but there have been bar exams that have had more than one crossover question. In fact, I think the last exam might have had three or four crossover questions. So I've noticed California has been leaning a little bit more towards crossovers, at least in the last few years. But I don't know if that's just by accident or it's a trend. Thus, because crossover questions can appear, you cannot assume that a topic will not appear more than once. For example, there can be a question that has professional responsibility and business associations tested, and then the next day you can see a pure professional responsibility question, which means professional responsibility has shown up in two essays. Now, that's the very loose definition of what a crossover essay is. Now, how do you actually approach this? You approach it by figuring out what is the focus of the question. Usually in crossover questions, the prompt or call will have separate, um, each prompt or call will address a separate body of law. So they'll split it into different questions. So, in other words, each prompt will ask you to address only one substantive body of law. They'll split it up like this: May Dan properly be found guilty of a crime of murder or any less included offenses? Discuss. So, first thing you want to do is what area of law? Well, this is crim law focused. It's going to be very rare that you're going to have crim and some other subject tested in one prompt. Then you'll probably have another prompt that says, oh, how should the court rule on each ground of Dan's motions to dismiss the charge of attempting to burn a copy of the US Constitution? Well, now this one's con law focused. And again, you'll be able to see this is a crossover question because in most cases, they're going to split up the prompts with the exception of remedies, where a lot of times they'll say, well, what cause of action and possible remedies can the plaintiff request? That is the one type of crossover question where they're not separate prompts. It's kind of merged together. But in most cases, you're going to see two separate prompts. So that's what you do when you actually approach it. After you've identified what area of law you're dealing with, you just approach it like you would approach any criminal law essay or con law essay or essay in that substantive area of law, right? So it's not anything different than what you've been doing for non crossover questions. Now, how do you prepare for these crossover questions, especially seeing that there's more of them showing up on the California bar, at least in recent years? Well, the first thing is you want to understand how the big substantive topics relate to one another. How do these topics intersect? And that is kind of playing more into the big picture, seeing if you really can understand like multiple choice questions that test more than one issue, see if you can figure out well how to navigate some of these overlapping issues like takings or wills and trusts, where you have someone who died as well as someone who's married to someone, where you have community property issues. So seeing where the intersections are. You also want to think about, well, what fact patterns normally raise multiple areas of law? Another, like I said, takings, a good example is you have people who actually have their property taken away. You'll have that as a con law as well as real property. So they can pair a takings question with either con law or real property. For the wills and trusts community property example, whenever somebody's married and someone dies, that's probably going to be a crossover question. So looking for those types of facts that tend to trigger the same sort of themes will help you prepare and make sure you understand how all these themes work together. Another example is crim pro and con law, where you can have cruel and unusual punishment. Now, again, seeing the fact patterns is important, but understanding how they interact is even more important. Here's one more example. I guess we're just going to have lots of examples today, which is torts and civ pro, where you have a motion to dismiss a tort claim, where you have to figure out, well, should the motion to dismiss be granted? Well, that depends on the strength of the underlying tort claim. That's a really tricky way to test two areas of law. Another way is to really think about the substantive law you learned in classes. Were there any classes where the same topic was, were there any topics that were taught in two classes? For example, as takings, you might have learned it in con law and property. You might have learned cruel and unusual punishment in crim pro and con law. If you took remedies, you might have learned about expectancy damages, but you also learned about it in contracts. So seeing where there are multiple topics that are tested or taught in different classes or taught, that's going to help you see where the overlap is. And then, of course, take several practice questions. This will help you identify what the California bar tends to test on together, because there is a pattern. But just in case you don't have as much time to take every crossover question, well, let me actually go to this slide first. Here are the common crossovers, the topics. Business associations and contracts, where we have in red. Con law tends to cross over with crim pro, crim law, real property. Crim pro and crim law, of course, you see those crossover all the time. They're even like a subject together. Remedies, it crosses over with all your civil actions towards contract, civ pro, real property corporations. Torts crosses over with other civil actions, again, civ pro, contracts, real property, and remedies. And then wills and trusts tends to cross over with community property and real property. Now, these are just common crossovers. There might be some that I haven't thought of or that could be coming up in the future, but these are the ones that I see as most common. But in California, the most common crossover is professional responsibility. Professional responsibility shows up almost every year, either as a pure question on its own or as a crossover with one of these subjects. Because all you got to do is make one of the parties an attorney, and now you have a professional responsibility question. So if there's one area of law that you must 100% know and understand and be ready for at any point in an essay, it's going to be professional responsibility because of its ability to cross over so easily. Now, finally, before we do our practice, how do you attack these in a step-by-step kind of manner? Like we said, address the essay by call or number. So first identify that substantive area of law, and then just identify, okay, we're doing crim law. After that, you're going to use the attack plan you made for the topic for that substantive area of law. So again, address the essay by number or call, then apply the substantive law, and then use your attack plan. And then the facts will trigger the issues that you're going to address for each topic. So again, it's nothing different than what you're doing for regular essays. There's just that extra step that usually you're going to have to split up by prompt, and that you're going to have to identify what substantive area of law you're dealing with. Final tip before we practice is all crossover issues are not treated equally. So you can have two prompts, but it doesn't mean you're going to spend 30 minutes on one prompt and 30 minutes on another prompt. You could have one prompt that takes you 40 minutes and then one prompt that's really only 5 to 10 minutes. They're never divided 100% equally. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. That's why it's really important to do an outline before you start writing, so that you can identify, well, how much time do I need to spend on prompt one versus how much time I need to spend on prompt number two.